Hello and welcome to another Six Sages Gaming Duel series. Today we have for you another match between the Al-Cid Blitz deck on the right versus a Earth, Water, Warrior of Light control list. And again, a bunch of these decks are what have been featured out of the regionals from the UK or other places, so if you want to check out these lists or one like them, make sure to head over to fftcgmognet.com/blog for a wonderful collection of lists that we've been collecting from around the world, and we will have even more lists for you as regionals occur. I know that Germany and Australia, I believe, should have ones pretty soon, and we have reached out to some contacts to forward us some lists when they can. And as always, if you are enjoying our content, make sure to drop us a like and subscribe because it does help us, get the word out there to more players. So both players starting off with their early water backups, and Astrologian on the right, Minwoo on the left. Overpaying for the Minwoo certainly feels bad, but we pass back going to turn 2 for the Al-Cid Blitz player. At this point, we had realized that if you tutor for Gramus, we'll have to discard, so it makes no point to play the Gramus there. So using an Ash, which isn't that great in this matchup, but it gets a forward on the field and prevents us from discarding, so making best use as we can with just getting something on the board. The thing to note about Earth Water as well, it is one of my favorite combinations from a control deck standpoint, as it's a combination that has answers to just about, if not everything, in the meta currently that we've been seeing running well. But it can be very difficult to play, and especially in a best of one format. If you use one card incorrectly, it can very heavily swing the matchup against you because you don't have another way to catch up with that tempo. So as long as you know exactly what your opponent's playing and you're aware of other options that they might have, it's certainly a deck for you to play, but again, make sure to get your practice with it. So Ash coming in for a point of damage, revealing our opponent's Ash. A card that's certainly a lot better for him than it is for us because it can't die to Al-Cid, which is very relevant. And then we just play another backup and pass. The one thing I will say about the Al-Cid Blitz deck is that it does have some very rough draws at times. When you get stuck with double Tidus early, that can certainly feel bad. Just knowing how important that card can be in the mid to late game. So you can see me holding on to both of them for quite some time, which is functionally two dead cards in my hand because we never want to discard them. Going back to our opponent, it looks like he has a Vincent that he could play. Obviously, they just tutored off Jesse. That's probably what I would be leading with. Ash is okay here. Can't see what some of the other backups are. If he had a 2-drop backup to play and just start a stall match with it. But ultimately, I think Vincent would be the best thing to play here. And that's exactly what he's going to be doing, dropping down the Vincent, the death penalty version. And probably just a pass back. And you can see that he has Seraphine in hand, but not anything that he really wants us to be able to get back. So here we're finally going to use our tutor. A quick note here, because I forget to mention it, or I forget about it until after I tutor and my opponent and I have a comment about it, is that it can also look for Ash, which would then give me the ability to use her special, or threaten to use her special, which will allow me to get through for a point of damage. But the thing I've noticed while playing this deck is that Tidus is very difficult to get to a relevant power level unless you play an Al-Cid first to get 2 backups onto the field in one turn, and then play him on a following turn or 2. So ultimately our initial thought process was to play the Al-Cid, unfortunately for no value, just get more forwards out on the board, and then hopefully draw into a Minwoo while we have Tidus on board and lock it up that way. So at this point we're just going to pass with 5 cards in hand, hoping to see what we draw the next turn, not under a lot of pressure, and lets us sculpt out our next turn a little bit more efficiently. And again, our opponent is just staring down a grip of cards. I mean, Leviathan, all these are just fine cards to have in his hand to answer what we might be playing as well, and can stall the game out in his favor. So it looks like he's going to be going for the unit play just to bounce something back to our hand, get into point of damage, and unfortunately hits our Tidus. Now again, the very important thing to note here is now knowing that I have to make the decision. Okay, there is only 2 Tidus left in the deck, and they're both in my hand. Assuming that the game is going to go long, and I'm going to have to set up a turn where I can blitz ace for a win if I don't just naturally draw into some key pieces like Al-Cid into a Mon, into a Odin, for example. We have to have that plan be on the ready. So it's now 2 cards we just can't do anything about because we have to save them, as it's the last 2 copies of him in the deck. So ultimately we're assigned to, as I mentioned previously, using Al-Cid to get 2 forwards into play again, just so I don't have to discard now in this case, but also to help power him up, Tidus up on the following turns. And again, really feels bad that our opponent has Minwoo, which of course we all know how good Minwoo can be against lightning decks, and this certainly goes to that point. So here we had made a comment that some people might miss it, so he puts his Minwoo on top just to make sure no one says that we missed anything, because we didn't. It's just, it doesn't unfortunately do anything for us. And then we just replay the Ash to, again, get another forward on the field. The other thing that you have to be wary of is also keeping in mind that the Lightning Water deck functions very much as a tempo deck, meaning there's a lot of things that allow us to generate advantage early, be it bouncing with Leviathan off EX Burst, Al-Cid playing an extra unit for free, you know, a couple different things like that. Odin EX Burst certainly feels great as well. That our opponent has to be wary of only having 1 or maybe 2 forwards on the field at a time, because a well-timed Leviathan can push through for a lot of damage, or even a Mon being able to dull something when he enters the field can work as well. Now, knowing he has Minwoo up here, he could have just stalled for a few more turns. Ultimately, he probably feels like he needs to get in some kind of damage or while he can, but I think I would have just not attacked here. Minwoo blocks both of them. Again, the debate comes back to, do you play around our opponent having Leviathan? Do you just get to the point of damage? But I think it's always better to force our opponent to have an answer for temporary damage, if that's the game that you want to play in a control deck. So here we're playing Cecil, makes other guys bigger. Again, I have a love-hate with this card. It's great when our opponents aren't familiar with what he does, and you know, they misplay it by trying to put damage off abilities or what have you, but or even sometimes just forgetting that he gives the rest of your forwards plus 1,000 power, which again is quite relevant. But I hate the fact that he has to block, being the only downside. And again, our hand unfortunately didn't have a lot of things that we really wanted to be doing with it. So this was the only card that we could have played, and at least it's threatening a 9k to be bigger than his Vincent as well. It looks like he has Cloud of Darkness in his hand, which is certainly interesting. Of course, if you play it here, you're only getting rid of your opponent's Al-Cid and Ash, which can certainly not be exactly where you want to be, but it gives you an opportunity to reset the board a little bit. But I'd like to wait it out, force our opponent to play some more things, and then play the Cloud of Darkness. Unfortunately, again, here we have Rigby, who unfortunately is not doing anything while our opponent has Minwoo. We do have the Leviathan, so we have an opportunity to attack with Cecil. If our opponent has something like a Golem, again, playing Earth, very reasonable card for them to have, we can just bounce the card in response, so that way they lose out in Golem and they have to replay. In this case, it would be Vincent. So we just are feeling very confident, can go ahead and attack. And then we just decide to keep the keep the ball rolling and see where it ends up. And a note here is that sometimes you do just need to bluff, that you might have something else. Ultimately, of course, I didn't. I just wanted to try to cheat in another point of damage. Arguably, I could have attacked with Al-Cid there as well, just to keep the bluff rolling. But then he does have the opportunity to block with Ash, and there's not a lot that I could potentially have. Yeah, I guess my out there would be Cyclops, but he also knows that I'm not currently running it. So here he's going to crack back for damage. Immediately I know here for how fast that he was attacking that he has to have a Shantoto or a Cloud of Darkness or something. So I realize that there's absolutely no point to not block here. And again, because it opens him up to taking points of damage, knowing that we have Leviathan in our hand, we can potentially just win the game on the next turn. So here he plays the Cloud of Darkness. Obviously in this case that we're keeping our Cecil. He's going to keep his Vincent because it's the biggest guy, and Death Penalty is a great ability, of course. And then he gets to follow up with a Delita as well, just putting down a massive 9k body. And that was him pointing to his Yuna that I had to remove my other 2 cards. Again, because I have Sage, it's certainly a relevant effect. And here you can see me just being amused with the series of draws that I have here, and that's where I mentioned to him that I have both Tidus stuck in hand that I've had for the entire game. So you know, if this was Hearthstone, it'd be your opponent is sitting on those last 2 cards in his hand that he's you know, that they haven't played all game. But that is for topic for a different day. So this whole series of events was me just trying to determine if I had enough to play everything out of my hand, and then I forget that Tidus is not Waka's effect, and what I mean by that is he's only getting plus 2,000 for having 1 Cecil and the other effect instead of Waka, which would give him 2,000 for because he has 2 forwards, and then another one because it counts as himself. So it would have been an extra 1,000 power that mistakenly just didn't have. So here we're going to give Tidus Lightning, and I say to him that, you know, don't scoop if it's a Leviathan. You're not dead, and well, he hits Yuna, which is technically not Leviathan, but it still gives him another turn. So again, in that case, it's one of those you have to go for it, and you can see me saying that exact thing. It's, you know what, I know I played that correctly. You have to go for it if you have it. If your opponent just happens to hit the EX burst or something, that's the game you play. So our opponent has some options here. Warrior Light makes a great defensive blocker. Delita is not doing, you know, he just pay 3 and play Delita. That's probably not the best spot that he wants to be in. He really just needs to get another blocker down at this point. Again, leaving the 1 Earth up as a way to pretend if he has Golem or something. So lucky for us that we get to draw the Amon here. Because as we've pulled off in a couple videos now, now that I think about it, we get to play the Amon, which is going to dull something on enter. Red Mage is going to give him haste, and we can dull his other forward. And then we can just attack with the last point of damage. And then, of course, the last point of damage was a Leviathan, which, keeping in mind, doesn't do anything there, but it's still quite amusing for how that game had played out. So there you see the Golem finally coming down, our opponent leading with a Machinist, which is a criminally underplayed card in a lot of Earth decks, I've noticed by looking at the top 8 list. Now, I'm not saying it's a 3 of by any means, but at least a 1 of, and I would even argue a 2 of in some lists as well. And it's just not being played, so that's a very interesting thing I've noticed for a card that I would have expected to see a lot more play. And the 2-drop Monk, which gives something plus 3k in Brave, which very interestingly enough, in the Warrior Light decks, what you can do is use Monk's ability, pump up Warrior Light, go to attack, and do the Cloud trick, if you will, where once they're declared as attacking, they attack, and you can still dull to use his effect, so you can nuke something for 11k. And you know, that's certainly one of the advantages that Cloud has over Warrior Light. It's inherently a more aggressive card, where Warrior Light is great at being defensive because Cloud can attack and use Omni Slash in the same turn and force your opponent to remove 2 blockers, in some cases if they're already at 5 or 6 points of damage. And here you can see our hand is pretty interesting in terms of having the Odin and that, of course, not being able to do anything. So there was a point here to switch how he played it. I forget if there's a backup or something else. For the Black Mage, if we want to just wait a turn, play that to set this up for the next turn. But this way we get to get rid of his Vincent, which is certainly a problematic card, and we are able to give Al-Cid haste, so he can get in for a point of damage while it is still good. And of course, seeing the Minwoo come down here on the next turn is a great feeling because we already got to live the dream once. We are able to create some tempo off of it, and it looks like, unless our opponent is willing to, actually he's short a blue card, never mind. I thought he was going to be able to play the Cecil here, but our opponent is kind of stuck on the opportunity to play anything out of his hand, so we're just going to be able to get in for 2 more free points of damage. And again, him here hitting the Yuna, which again, just Captain run good when it comes to the Yuna and Leviathans that were pretty tough to deal with. So here we're playing the Tidus. It's certainly not an ideal board state because he's only an 8k, which is pretty vanilla. We obviously haven't taken any damage yet, so his Blitz Ace effect is pretty useless. But there is a point here where we might be able to have our opponent play a threat, again, not for any value, but we get to play an Al-Cid, put 2 more forwards onto the battlefield, and then make Tidus a relevant power size. Ultimately, that's not what happens, but we still have the opportunity to go down that avenue. And here you can see our hand. It is a bit bricked. It's all lightning. And then the Waka to play the Yuna, which, you know, not sure if it's correct or not, but I want to get in 2 more points of damage while we could, so we do dump one of our Tidus. And the other reason why I do it at this point is understanding that this will push our opponent to 4 points of damage and remove his blocker, obviously. So it's very unlikely that we are going to be able to Blitz Ace in this game at a relevant point. You know, we're spending a lot of resources to try to keep the momentum going, and at some point, if our opponent is able to stabilize, unless we just draw absolutely insane, it's very unlikely that we're going to be able to come back and then win with a Blitz Ace, you know, in the very, very late game. So we decided it's okay to get rid of a Tidus for the sake of 2 damage here. Delita coming down as a powerful 9k, being able to break one of his guys. One of his backups, which he's low on resources, so I'm not sure that that's the best move. And here is me making a comment, realizing that Yuna does hate character, so just for the sake of being correct, we are going to remove his stuff, just so he can't Seraphy it back, hopefully. Of course, you have to remember Yuna's effect. That's not something that your opponent's often going to give you, so, you know, place a die on it, whatever you have to do. What I usually do in other games is I'll put a die on or near my break zone or discard pile, just so I remember if I have different effects. Obviously, please check with your tournament organizer to make sure that that is okay. So our opponent mulling over some choices. Looks like he just wants to fight. And we're in an interesting position. We don't want to lose what we're our board state, our tempo, and our opponent did just have to discard a few number of cards. So basically what happens here is that Raban will check that Delita is on playing the card or casting. It'll check that as a legal target, or in this case when it enters, checks for the legal target, says, hey, Delita's going to deal this damage. I Odin it. The game state checks again. Raban says, oh, there's nothing here now, so we're not going to deal the damage. For example, if it was a 4 that was dealing the damage, if it was Delita that was dealing the damage based on some other effect, then the game would say, hey, last known information, it would die. So in this case, Tidus is able to survive this interaction, and we don't like what we had to discard, but again, we realize that we're in a game state, that we're very much in the driver's seat. We have to keep that momentum going, and hopefully, our opponent's going to be very limited to playing these high-costed cards, where we can likely only play 1 or 2 returns. So if we draw an Odin, an Amont, a Leviathan, we already used a Yuna, but that would have been another example. We do have a series of outs that we can draw to our opponent playing 1 backup at a time. And if you look at his hand right here, this is a prime example of the issues that the Earth Water decks can have with being a little bit slower on some of their draws. So feeling pressured, our opponent decides to Cloud of Darkness just to get one of our guys off the board. And ultimately here we just decide that Amon is going to be good enough for getting in a point of damage with Tidus and clean up the game that way. Going on to our third and final game. And again, I think that's a pretty classic example of a control deck that doesn't get their low end and or enough backups versus a deck that is very tempo driven and has the opportunity to punish our opponent being slower and playing high costed guys. So that is exactly where that deck wants to be in those matchups every single time. Seraphy, I have a love-hate relationship with it. If you're on the play, this is exactly the scenario where Seraphy is a great card. However, we have been finding that unless it's able to get you back a Vincent for insane value, 9 times out of 10, Seraphy is just a completely dead card late game. So I'm not ultimately convinced that 3 Seraphy should be in every Earth list. If you're trying to play a more aggressive deck that maybe then has Gapal in it as well, I think that's fine. But in the more controlled, dirtily type decks, I can't insist on running Seraphy. So here we kind of have a cute start with the Astro for Astro and Minwoo for Minwoo, but sometimes you just draw like that. So our opponent now is certainly the aggressor currently, and that Seraphy getting in a few points of damage, feels good. But we also have double lightning in our hand, which is a bit poor for us because, again, high cost of cards that you don't want to be stuck with. So as I mentioned, we're going to be playing the lightning here. And what's great about it does help us color fix our hand a little bit by finding an Odin, but then also that Odin allows us to break a 4-drop backup when we really need it to. Keeping in mind that Al-Cid is what we have to rely on for Vincent, but we do have 1 piece in our hand. We just have to hope our opponent doesn't hit the Minwoo on this turn and that we draw into another combo piece. We had the Al-Cid, but I don't remember if there was a Onion Knight or Rigby in my hand at this point. Now that we're going to hopefully get a look at that, or not. And again, I do want to take a moment to say thank you to Justyn for coming out and recording. It was another late night for us trying to get both Duel series recorded in a night and obviously editing all that stuff on different nights throughout the week. But we love being able to bring you guys some content, and we really do hope that you enjoy the Duel series that we get to put out and the different decks that we get to showcase. So here, Justyn, realizing that he's still very much in control, he's realizing that, hey, he needs to get in for the points of damage where he can. Let's get the 6 cost off the table and push our opponent to 4 damage. So now we have 8 cards in hand at this point and have a slew of options. Again, the unfortunate note here is that now that Vincent is dull, we can't ever use Al-Cid in a meaningful way, I should say. So here we're going to play the Cecil just to be a beefy blocker, and again with Minwoo, that certainly has its own advantage as well. And then we're kind of wishing we just had another, had a lightning backup or some other lightning resources that we can discard to get the last card in play. And with that other lightning in our hand, it would be really nice to have that lightning backup so then we can use Army of 1 and get his Vincent off the table that way. And this is another one of those moments where, namely, if that Vincent was a cloud and that other Vincent in his hand was another cloud, he could just attack and then Omni Slash here and be way further ahead. Keeping in mind that Vincent is certainly a good card in itself, but just to give you an idea of, hey, in a board state, where would you really want Cloud still? A card that hasn't been seeing much play as people are using Emperor or Warrior Light, but I think it still certainly has its viability. And here you see him using the effect where he had to discard a ton of cards for just to remove Cecil. So not ideally where you want to be, but it does give you the opportunity to at least clear the board, get another point of damage, and get your opponent to 5 points at this state. So me again just being stuck with the lightnings in my hand that just won't go away, unfortunately. Again, it's a card I want to try as a 3 of, just to use its other effects, and again specifically Army of 1. And tutoring for an Odin is of course great, but it's a card that I think really needs to be in the right deck, and I'm not convinced this is the right spot for it, but I just wanted another 9k body when I needed it. And interesting enough to note here, it looks like that's double Warrior Light in his hand. So if he had a Leviathan, I mean, that just would have been game over right there. Of course, we would have been forced to Odin so we don't die, but if he just had another blue card, it would have been a very different game now that I'm, getting the chance to review this. So Warrior Light, certainly a good card, but as we mentioned before, having those light and dark cards in your deck can be severely limiting as well, because you can't discard them for crystal points. So here our opponent is just going to play his Warrior Light, try to be build up a little bit better of a board state. Again, Minwoo is saving us right now, and our opponent is hoping to draw the water card so we can use Leviathan. Again, lucky for us, this does give us the opportunity to use the Odin in our hand, and even strategically use Black Mage if we really wanted to play around him having a Golem in hand. So there's actually a lot of different options that we have in this board state, and ultimately getting Vincent is probably where we want to be. So if we had a lightning backup in a perfect world, we could use Army of 1, kill one of his guys, and then use Astro to untap lightning when he goes to attack. So in this case, we're just going to Army of 1, gives her first strike, and forces our opponent to block if able. So we're able to kill Vincent that way, and at least get one of his guys taken care of. And then it looks like we have the opportunity to play the Odin to get rid of Warrior Light. Now, knowing his deck doesn't have any kind of ways to play haste or anything like that, we don't really mind going to 6 here, and then gives us the opportunity to crack back. So we finally get an EX burst in this match. Good old Leviathan coming in at a very key point for us. Again, this goes to speak to a very specific point in the game where our opponent doesn't want a Seraphy either, so it's just a dead card in his hand at this point. And here our opponent just plays another Warrior Light, which we of course have yet another Odin for, so we're able to answer that, then get into a point of damage. Now here we realize that we have to start applying some pressure. We already have one Blitz Ace in the break zone, and we realize that it is technically correct to play the Blitz Ace, or play the Tidus and hoping of drawing another Blitz Ace, or another Tidus for Blitz Ace. Ironically enough, we do rip it off the top here, but we don't have a card to deal with the Prish, So we're doing this this bit of a stare off between the two. You know, and this is one of those cases again where I had the idea to play Waka just so I could have another forward. Waka can hopefully pump himself, but then again, keeping in mind Prish gains plus 4,000 every time she blocks, so that's not a real real answer as well, or either I should say. And here our opponent is stuck with a Cosmos and a Warrior Light, so hitting the double light, absolutely crushing his game plan. So here we hit the unit in Leviathan, so we know that we have an answer to Prish, and we're a card short from being able to bounce it in Blitz Ace, if I'm counting correctly. Or no, there we go. It's Waka and Astro for Leviathan, and then the other card and Tidus for Blitz Ace. And here I was just counting the number of EX bursts that he had still left in the deck. Because ideally, I need to push through for 6 points of damage here. And in theory, Tidus only needs to get in for 5 points of damage. And then Lightning, as long as he doesn't hit Leviathan before that 5th point of damage, then Lightning can get the last point as needed. Because there's nothing that he can have that's going to be able to answer both of them in one of the EX bursts. So we take a very long time, too long, honestly, considering what he might have, knowing that even if Blitz Ace fails here, our opponent would just get to replay the Prish, for example. And it's not that terrible for us, but we do have to spend our hand to hopefully win the turn on this game. And again, in this situation, you just 100% go for it. You have to realize that, again, Blitz Ace is in the deck for just saying that we're going to go for it, we're going to win the game on this turn type of play. And ultimately, that's what we're both kind of having a conversation around it at this point to see if it's right or not. So I think we'd still win the game if we don't have, if Blitz Ace doesn't hit through for all the attacks, if we draw, say, an Amon, or just another way to answer the Prish, and keeping in mind we haven't seen any Amon yet either, we do have outs. So again, this is me taking way too long to consider it, but then Waka and Blitz Ace. So we're going to attack 6 times and get through some beats. And spoiler, this is going to go all the way. So this right here shows the absolute powerhouse behind Blitz Ace. So that's all we have for this video, guys. I really hope you enjoyed. Please make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Let us know what duel series you want to see up next, and we will catch you on the next 6 Sages Gaming Duel Series.